discussed, one nation, one poll be discussed, the UCC be discussed, a women reservation bill be discussed. All of that, in terms of speculation, still rife.
स्पेशल सेशन होते रहते हैं राहुल जी?
नहीं होते नहीं रहते, ये तो बहुत ही कम। मैं हिस्ट्री स्टडी कर रहा था, ऐसे नहीं कि कुछ ना कुछ बड़ा ही होता है तभी स्पेशल सेशन होते हैं। क्या सोच रहे हैं आप?
मोदी जी हैं तो कुछ बड़ा ही होगा।
Big suspense over the special parliament session this month. It was on India Today that Union Minister Anurag Thakur dropped the big bombshell.
क्या आपने G20 के बीच में क्या शगुफा छोड़ा है?
स्पेशल सेशन होते रहते हैं राहुल जी?
नहीं होते नहीं रहते, ये तो बहुत ही कम। मैं हिस्ट्री स्टडी कर रहा था, ऐसे नहीं कि कुछ ना कुछ बड़ा ही होता है तभी स्पेशल सेशन होते हैं। क्या सोच रहे हैं आप?
मोदी जी हैं तो कुछ बड़ा ही होगा। अगर मात्र 2-2.5 साल में भारत को नई संसद दे दें आजादी के अमृत महोत्सव में, आजादी का अमृत महोत्सव मनाते हुए देश के 2 लाख से ज्यादा कार्यक्रम हों, करोड़ों भारतीय जुड़े, हर घर तिरंगा अभियान में हर घर पे तिरंगा झंडा फहराया जाए, 370-35 के बाद तो जम्मू कश्मीर के भी हर घर में तिरंगा, मोदी है तो मुमकिन है।
The opposition India grouping has been jittery ever since the centre announced this special session from September 18th to 22nd. Amidst political speculation and buzz over the centre's likely push for Bharat to be adopted as the country's name, One India, One Poll, Uniform Civil Code, and the Women's Reservation Bill. Former Congress President Sonia Gandhi has written a letter to Prime Minister Modi seeking a debate on communalism, a joint parliamentary committee probe on the Adani issue, border conflicts with China, and a caste census.
9 महत्वपूर्ण मुद्दे हैं जो हम उठाना चाहते हैं लोकसभा में, राज्यसभा में। किस नियम के अनुसार उठाए जाएंगे उस पर बातचीत हो सकती है।
पहले स्पेशल सेशन पे सवाल, अब फिर एजेंडे पे सवाल, अभी अगर सेशन में कहीं गलती से पहुंच जाएंगे तो वहाँ बवाल। अरे भैया, पहले आप जो है वो डिबेट, डिस्कशन और डिसीजन के पार्टिसिपेट करने की मानसिकता तो बनाइए।
The India Alliance has demanded that the government maintain transparency and not keep the country in the dark or in suspense.
कि पहले तो ये बहुत ही विचित्र बात है कि ये एक स्पेशल सेशन बुलाया जाता है पार्लियामेंट का और सूचना ही नहीं दी जाती कि किस विषय पे बुलाया जा रहा है। इतना सीक्रेसी क्यों मेंटेन करना है? ट्रांसपेरेंसी से चलना होता है डेमोक्रेसी में।
सीधे मानना है कि अभी सरकार से मुझको कोई उम्मीद नहीं है। ये सरकार सरोकारों से दूर चली गई है। इन्होंने इस लोकतंत्र को राजतंत्र में तब्दील करके रख दिया, जहां राजा तेरे सुबह की जय, राजा तेरे शाम की जय। फॉरगेट अपोजिशन पार्टीज, कैबिनेट मिनिस्टर्स को नहीं पता ये होती है प्रणालियां, ये है कैबिनेट सिस्टम। क्या बना के रख दिया है साहब।
India Today has learnt that the special session will start in the old Parliament House and after 1.5 days will move to the new Parliament on the auspicious day of Ganesh Chaturthi. Bureau Report, India Today.
Let's cut across to our panelists this evening. Joining me is Syed Zafar Islam from the Bharatiya Janata Party, Shama Mohammed from the Congress spokesperson, and joining me in a short while from now will be Rajdeep Sardesai, our consulting editor in the studio. Shama, if you can hear me, you had Sonia Gandhi write a letter to the Prime Minister wanting to know what will be the agenda when it comes down to the special session of Parliament. The BJP says, why be scared? Come in, it's a special session of the Parliament, and you're coming off the G20. Why get into fear mongering and raise questions? Shama, can you hear me?
अच्छा तो अब
Okay, we are seeming to have a bit of a problem where Shama Mohammed's audio line is concerned. But okay, let's cut across to Zafar Islam from the Bharatiya Janata Party. Mr. Islam, it's a very clear question. Why shouldn't the opposition be asking you what is the agenda of a special joint session? Never in the history is what the president of the Congress Party has said, that it's happened when a joint session has been called and the opposition is clueless. They don't know what's going to be up for discussion or the agenda.
Preeti ji, I'm sure that you know how the business is transacted in the parliament, how the agenda is discussed and then it is placed on the floor of the parliament. Eve of this, every session, every day's agenda is being discussed with the Business Advisory Committee and the next day it is placed. So when you get to know the agenda, just before in the evening of or the eve of the next day's business, you get the entire agenda on the eve of the next day's session. So they will get to know even now the way business is getting transacted in the parliament. Same thing will happen this time. Why there's a hue and cry? No one I have ever seen has made this kind of a statement that we don't know the agenda. Agenda is something which the Business Advisory Committee will discuss, and next day it will be placed on the every member will get to know. Every vendor will get to know in the evening itself, and next morning it will be debated on the floor of the parliament. So is there any problem with that? I do not understand what is the problem, why people are making hue and cry when there is
but it's to give the time to the opposition is what
everyone
is
knows.
To give time to the opposition is what the Congress is demanding. But let me bring in Shama Mohammed into this conversation. Shama Mohammed, the BJP spokesperson, very clear that on the eve of the joint session, your party, other opposition parties will be communicated on what the agenda will be. Why get into fear-mongering? Why create this perception that the government is trying to bulldoze a joint session?
Why should we believe them? There is a special session called all of a sudden. Why can't they call, just as they call the special session, why don't they call an all-party meet? I mean, that is the way our parliament is functioned, an all-party meet, and the government brings in the agenda, there's a discussion and a consensus is built on what is going to be discussed in parliament. I mean, that's how we worked. How do we believe this government? Tell me. All of a sudden, we see an invite saying Bharat instead of India. And then again, another invite goes from the Prime Minister saying Bharat to the G20 dignitaries. So on what basis are you putting all of a sudden Bharat instead of India? I mean, so they keep taking these decisions all of a sudden. We know sudden decisions take place by Mr. Modi. So how do we believe what they're saying? And last session of Parliament also, we wanted to discuss important issues, but they're not ready to discuss. There is a Prime Minister who comes to Parliament once in a blue and just gives him his Mann Ki Baat. That is what is happening. All Prime Ministers before him. I remember during Manmohan Singh's time, when they came out with this huge 3G allegation, during the session, Mr. Manmohan Singh sat there and listened to it. So that is how the parliament functions. But let me give you one small thing. The Prime Minister of India has traveled all over the world. He comes back and meets our scientists from the BRIC, when he was in South Africa after the BRIC meeting. He lands and meets our scientists. A very good thing. I'm very happy about it. But I want to know, when is he going to Manipur? This complete breakdown of the constitution there. 2 days ago, people were killed. 5 more people killed.
Okay.
Journalists cannot do anything there. They cannot report over there. The Editors Guild report has come out with it. It's not the Congress party. So why is the Prime Minister of India not visiting Manipur? I want to really know about it. What is the solution there? There is still
all right,
violence.
Shama, stay with me. Fair questions that you've raised. I want to go back. I want to go back. I'd like to go back to Syed Zafar Islam. Syed Zafar Islam, you say, why is the opposition getting into fear-mongering? They'll know the agenda. The question is, sir, it's the government that has somewhere down the line created a massive trust deficit where the opposition is concerned. And I'll give you examples of it. When it comes down to constituting a committee on one nation, one poll, you caught the opposition completely off guard. When it was all the way back in June, when there was talks of formulating a committee as such, the opposition was kept in the dark. You sprung it upon them. Where it came down to the invitation which Shama Mohammed just elucidated, instead of the President of India, it said the President of Bharat. You can argue that it's legal, but the opposition can argue under the Constitution, Section 52, it's illegal. Therefore, the question, Syed Zafar Islam, is you've created a trust deficit. Now you've sprung up a joint parliament session on the opposition, and you expect them to toe the line. They are going to be apprehensive, sir.
I don't know. There is absolutely no headroom for apprehension, any kind of apprehension, because it is something which the participation will come from the opposition parties. It is not only the Treasury bench who will debate. The debate has to happen between the Treasury bench and the opposition parties. All of them have to speak on whatever issues which will be transacted on the floor of the parliament. So the opportunity will be for everyone to speak. So the issues will be debated, discussed, and that is why the parliament is, that any issues of national interest needs to be debated and discussed on the floor of the parliament before it becomes legislation. And that is something which will also happen, and they will get to know prior to being discussed on the floor of the parliament. So like any other session in the past, historically, see whether it's Congress party or us.
But because you created that trust deficit. You were talking about internally on a committee on one nation,
no,
one
there is not
poll.
there.
You sprung it upon the opposition. So therefore, why should they believe you? But having said that, I'll come back to you.
Listen,
I want to introduce our consulting editor, Rajdeep Sardesai, into this conversation as well. Rajdeep, a trust deficit which lies bare, the opposition clueless on what this joint session is, the media deliberating because every day we have something new to discuss. Will it be one nation, one poll? Will it be UCC? Will it be women's reservation bill? Or will it be a discussion on changing the official name to Bharat from India?
Look, the fact is, the practice has been that when you call a special session, you have a clear agenda before it. That's been the practice. If you recall, when the special session was called for the goods and services tax in 2016, or indeed when a special session was called to mark 50 years of independence, you have a clear agenda, and then there is a sense that both sides, the government and the opposition, know what a special session as opposed to a parliament session. We need to make a distinction between the two. And because this special session has been called suddenly without an agenda being specified, that's where the concerns are coming from. And I think it is incumbent on the government to address those concerns. If the government has nothing to hide, and I'm sure they have nothing to hide, they should put these, make it very clear what the special session is about. And the government and the opposition should be talking to each other rather than being able to have to write letters, Sonia Gandhi to Prime Minister Modi, then Prahlad Joshi, the Parliamentary Affairs Minister, to the Congress leadership. I mean, it suggests, A, the breakdown of trust. It suggests that the government may have some other motive which they only want to reveal at the last moment. And that doesn't help the functioning of Parliament. Just one more point, Preeti. The real truth is the 17th Lok Sabha has been the worst functioning Lok Sabha in the history of this country, both in terms of the number of sittings and the number of adjournments. And therefore, I think it is even more incumbent on the treasury benches that run the House to make sure that this special session is productive. And to ensure productivity, or to ensure that whatever your agenda is fulfilled, you got to make it clear. Why this cloak and dagger stuff is what I'm unable to understand. I think that's the problem. No problem with a special session of Parliament. The government has every right to call it. But when you call it, do not do it in a cloak and dagger manner is, I think, what most parliamentary experts are claiming. They are saying that raises questions over your motives.
Rajdeep, before I let you go, I'm going to take another quick question.
I just respond?
The government unclear, in the history, that's what even Mr. Kharge had said, that it's never quite happened that before a special session, the opposition doesn't know what's on agenda. What do you think for someone who's watched this government over the last 10 years? Because there's this, wild speculation going on what could be up for discussion. Do you see it being the women's bill? Do you see it be UCC? Do you see a discussion on one nation, one poll?
Preeti, my belief is, I've learned the hard way, never try and read the mind of Prime Minister Modi. You never know what comes up next. I do believe, though, that the very fact that it is a 5-day session, it's not just about Amrit Kal and Band Baja Bharat. There is much more. This is not just about Chandrayaan and about G20. There is a legislative agenda which the government is hoping will set the narrative for 2024. There is much talk. It could be women's reservation. It could be OBC reservation. the Rohini Commission report. It will be an issue that the government hopes puts the opposition on the back foot. That's what I was told by a senior BJP leader. You will see it will be an issue that will put the government on the back, the opposition on the back foot. When I asked him what's the issue, he said even I don't know. And that's the irony. Even government ministers are unaware of the agenda of this special session. Now, you do not conduct parliament and parliamentary democracy in this kind of secrecy, in my view. But expect something that the Prime Minister will hope will set the agenda for 2024.
Well, expect the unexpected or expect the speculated. Thank you, Rajdeep, for joining us. Shama, I'll come back to you. Appreciate the patience. What is it that the Congress and the India Alliance fears that could be up for discussion? Understandably, the agenda should have been communicated. At least history stands testimony. There's been protocol to that.
Yeah, see, that is what I'm trying to tell you. They do not follow any protocol and all their decisions are whimsical. For example, I'll give you one. In 2015, when there was a PIL for a change from the name from India to Bharat, the government of India said, there is no change in circumstances to consider any change in Article 1 of the Constitution of India. So there was no change in circumstance then. Now, I want to know what is the circumstance now that they have put it in the invitation? You have to tell us only one circumstance, that is the alliance called India. They are just rattled with this alliance because I can see that in every talk of our Prime Minister Modi, everywhere when he gives a bhashan in Rajasthan or for that matter Madhya Pradesh, he keeps attacking the alliance called India. So that itself is rattled. Number two, you spoke about one nation, one poll. Now I fail to understand how is Harish Salve a part of it? He should be put out of that panel because he is hobnobbing with a fugitive called Lalit Modi. Lalit Modi is wanted by our government. And why is he hobnobbing? He's part of one nation, one poll. This is the man who's going to decide about our polls in India. I mean, I fail to understand that. And the other thing I want to say is every time Rahul ji takes the word Adani, it's expunged. We want a JPC in that. We've been telling, but there's no discussion on that. The mics of opposition party members are switched off. When our president, Mr. Kharge ji speaks, it's again switched off. So what is happening? Like Rajdeep said, democracy is really in danger, or I'm saying democracy is really in danger at this point of time. And I defy today, the spokesperson, Zafar is sitting here, I defy you to pass the Women's Reservation Bill, which your manifesto promised in 2014. We didn't have the numbers. We know that. We didn't have the numbers. In the Lok Sabha, you have the numbers. Do it and show it to the women of this India. Beti bachao, beti padhao, all these naras.
I want to go back to sides of...
do it.
Right. Okay. All right, Shama Mohammed, stay with me. Going back to Syed Zafar Islam.
Yep.
Syed Zafar Islam, the fact is, you know, we're a democracy. There's been parliament protocol. We're not a banana republic. You're calling a joint session of the parliament. History trans testimony. Every time the opposition is informed why a special session is being called. Why not this time around? Cut the speculation.
See, they need not speculate. They should wait for the agenda to come. Why there is a hue and cry? Why there is they are overly concerned about the agenda? The agenda will come. They will get to know.
Protocol, sir.
But they are
There's
trying to
protocol.
unnecessarily
Before the
create an
session,
issue because
the opposition is told
we know
when
the
the
protocol
session is
is
called. That's the reason it's being called. Okay, sir, go ahead.
No, that's not true. That's not true. Agenda is always provided before the session begins. They will also get to know what is the agenda. Their members in the advisory committee will also discuss about it. So the entire the parliamentary democratic protocol will be maintained like it was maintained earlier, like it has been done in the past. If today we are doing it, then you are creating an unnecessary issue and pinpointing us that we are not following the protocol. Then the Congress party have violated the protocol every time.
Not for a
they have
special
convened the
session,
parliament.
sir. Difference between a regular session of parliament and a special joint session.
It is the parliament is convened by the honorable president of Bharat. So she has convened this special session, and I think every member of the parliament should wait for the agenda to come. So they will. Was he aware? Mr. Rajiv Desai said that some minister, he didn't name the minister, he was not aware. So it has been convened. People will get to, every member of the parliament will get to know whether it's a part of the treasury bench or the part of the opposition bench. The problem is that they know, the problem with the opposition bench that they have zero acceptability in the eyes of the people of India. They are talking about trust deficit. In fact, they have created such perception about themselves, because every time they discuss in the Business Advisory Committee that these things will be discussed next day on the floor of the parliament, they back out, they do a lot of hangama, and they force the chair to somehow not letting the business to conduct on the floor of the parliament. So it is.
Okay,
so
I appreciate.
they are forcing to suspend the parliament.
I've come to the end of this debate. I appreciate both of you for joining us. The only difference is, yes, you're right, that before every parliament session, on the eve of it, the agenda is communicated. Different till now, where a special joint session is concerned. But having said that, speculation is rife. Will it be something completely out of the box, which would be up for discussion or an agenda? Or would it be one of the many trial balloons that have been floated, which is actually the real one? We'll only know starting the 18th of September till the 22nd of September. For now, appreciate both our guests for joining us. Thank you there. We leave you with a stunning image of the Bharata Mandapam at the back, and you can actually see, the streams of light, coming out from the Pragati Maidan as India preps for the G20. With that, thank you for joining us. Up next, Rahul Kanwar. Welcome to the special broadcast on India Today. I'm Akshita Anantagopal. We're in G20 week, and I know a lot of you are wondering what's the big fuss about the national capital, about how Delhi has changed. I'm here at the IGI airport, as you can see. I'm going to be taking the route that our G20 world leaders are taking to show you how much things have changed. If you've ever been to Delhi, get set, because you're not going to recognize half of the roads that I'm about to show you. Obviously, it'll be a lot less crowded for our world leaders, but I'll do the best I can to show you what their experience is going to be like going through Delhi. Let's go. The theme of our G20, the motto, is, as you see written here, Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam. And it's very fitting, really, because we're celebrating India's culture, celebrating India's traditions. The government has put a firm focus on all of that, as you'll see in posters and banners all around you if you've been to the national capital at this time. So let's take a look at how culture and tradition is currently being highlighted. This right here is a man-made marvel. It's not at a natural waterfall that I'm standing. I was actually taking the turn to come out of the airport when I spotted this. This lovely fountain or waterfall, whatever you want to call it, has been built on both sides of the road. So you've got one here, you've got another one on the opposite side. From Dola Khan, we made our way here to Sardar Patel Marg. What's crucial here? And why do you see so much decoration around me? Right opposite ITC Moria. That's where US President Joe Biden is going to be staying. You see a lovely G20 setup here, along with several pictures that have been put up saying India paving the way, we're healing the world through yoga and whatnot. Beautiful messages.
forecast now. Delhi, maximum 38 and minimum 28 degrees. Mumbai, maximum 30 and minimum 27 degrees. Kolkata, maximum 33 and minimum 26 degrees. Bangalore, maximum 26 and minimum 21 degrees. Chennai, maximum 32 and minimum 25 degrees. Hyderabad, maximum 30 and minimum 22 degrees.
Make your media plan smarter with India Today Live TV on your connected devices. Amplify your brand with 100 million smart internet viewers. To advertise, mail us at sales@aajtak.com.
We, the people of India, an India that is Bharat. That's how the Constitution describes the country. On Tuesday, a presidential invitation for a G20 dinner had the Republic of Bharat instead of the customary Republic of India printed on the surface in public domain. Earlier on September 2, the RSS chief, in a speech at Guwahati, proposed the name Bharat should be prioritized over India in common parlance.
उसका नाम भारत है तो दुनिया में कहीं भी जाएगा तो वो भारत ही रहना चाहिए. तो हम बोलने में लिखने में सर्वत्र भारत कहे. किसी को समझने में नहीं आया, चिंता न करे, उसको जरूरत है तो वो समझ लेगा. हमको जरूरत नहीं है सबको समझाने की.
Clamor within the ruling dispensation has grown to drop India from the country's name and start calling the nation Bharat. This kind of name changing, however, requires a constitutional amendment, a process involving both the Lok Sabha and the Rajya Sabha to have 2/3 of members present and in favor to pass the proposed modification, followed by ratification by states. Sources, however, indicate the government may at least bring in a resolution to rename India as Bharat during the Parliament's special session scheduled from the September 18th to the 22nd. Opposition parties have been swift to take a jab at the proposed name change exercise, insisting it was driven out of fear of Alliance's India nomenclature.
किसी पार्टियों का अलायंस इंडिया बन जाता है तो वो देश का नाम बदल देंगे. देश तो 140 करोड़ लोगों का है, किसी एक पार्टी का देश थोड़ी है.
Bihar's Deputy Chief Minister Tejasvi Yadav, West Bengal Chief Minister Mamata Banerjee and NCP Chief Sharad Pawar mounted a synchronized attack on the BJP government at the centre for the name change proposal. The India versus Bharat debate rages on, and it's likely to intensify further in the run-up to Parliament's upcoming session. Bureau Report, India Today.
Forecast now. Delhi, maximum 38 and minimum 28 degrees. Mumbai, maximum 30 and minimum 27 degrees. Kolkata, maximum 33 and minimum 26 degrees. Bangalore, maximum 26 and minimum 21 degrees. Chennai, maximum 32 and minimum 25 degrees. Hyderabad, maximum 30 and minimum 22 degrees.
Presented by RP Sanjeev Goenka Group, Growing Legacies.
Co-presented by Century Laminates by Manish Malhotra, fashion for your furniture.
Co-presented by Macho Hind, बड़े आराम से.
Co-powered by PolicyBazaar.com, हर family होगी insured. Co-powered by the bold look of Kohler. UBI, good people to bank with.
Welcome. The G20 was set up as a multilateral forum to discuss global economic affairs, but geopolitical tensions are threatening to derail the G20 economic agenda. To talk about the prevailing economic and geopolitical winds blowing right ahead of the big G20 summit in India, I'm joined on the news track by two renowned commentators who ply their craft at the intersection of geopolitics and geoeconomics. I have with me on the news track Martin Wolf, the chief economics commentator at the Financial Times, joining us from London, and Gideon Rahman, the chief foreign affairs commentator of the Financial Times, joining us from Hong Kong. We could just as well do a short news meeting here as well. Thank you very much, Martin and Gideon, for joining us. I want to start by asking you, Gideon Rahman, sitting where you are in Hong Kong at this moment, about your broad sense of the G20 summit in India in the way that is shaping up from your perspective. Prime Minister Modi and his government have invested a lot of energy, effort in trying to make this a grand success. Some big leaders have decided that they're not coming. What's your sense of how we're shaping up and building into this big G20 summit?
Well, clearly it's a big moment for India and for Modi, but I think there's been no doubt for some time that the G20 as an organization is in trouble. The Russia war on Ukraine has opened up a huge split inside it. You know, following the Indonesians who had this particular hot potato handed to them last year, they were wondering right up to the last moment what they would do about Putin, whether he would come, what kind of statement that could be made. And they just about got through it. And so, although I think it's both an opportunity but also an enormous challenge for India, because these divisions are opening up between the G20 nations. We're going back to something that looks more like a Cold War, not just the adversarial relationship between the West and Russia, but also an increasingly adversarial relationship between the US and China. And now this decision by Xi Jinping not to come to Delhi. And obviously he's a big miss. They're one of the two, if you like, superpowers of the current system. So the chances of getting a kind of global consensus on the kinds of issues that the G20 is meant to deal with, the economic issues, climate, debt restructuring, all that kind of thing, I think do recede a little bit. Although, of course, Xi is sending his prime minister, so it may be that China will still play ball to some extent.
Martin Wolf, in the aftermath of the financial crisis in 2008, the G20 emerged as the premier global platform for decision making, as it included not just the G7 countries but also the voice of the global south. In the tensions that are emerging now, do you think the G20 is becoming less relevant in the future, or do you think this is just a temporary blip from which the G20 might recover?
Well, first of all, I agree with everything Gideon said, so I won't go over that, about where we are now. I think the contrast you point to between where we were in late 2008 and early 2009, when there were two summits in short order, and which really shaped the global response to the financial crisis and put the G20 at the head of government level on the map. this was a sort of transformative, positive moment for those of us who hoped for a move to greater global governance. And the G20 was remarkably successful, notably with the London meeting in early 2009, April, if I remember correctly. And what we've seen since then is the G20's development reflects the development in geopolitics and geoeconomics, and most notably so, I would say, since the election of Donald Trump, the decisive shift to the United States, the clear move of Xi Jinping's China in a more inward-looking and even more authoritarian direction, the Ukraine, the impact of COVID, which was dramatic, of course, on the world economy and world politics, and finally the war. And the result is now that the G20 in the context of its history is obviously sort of a shell. This is in no way the fault of the Indian government, the Indian Prime Minister, who's clearly doing his best. But the reality is the G20 now looks like, cats in a bag. They just don't agree on anything. And the differences among them are very wide-ranging. They cover economics and politics over and above the traditional North-South differences and differences of opinion over how to handle key issues like climate. So making the G20 work is almost impossible, but that's a reflection of where the world is.
Gideon Rahman, everyone has his own take on why Xi Jinping decided to skip the Delhi summit. He went to Johannesburg for BRICS. He is going to the US possibly, and Putin will be coming to China. Despite all of this, he's announced he's not coming to Delhi. Why do you think Xi, at this point, took this decision?
Well, I mean, the simplest explanation might simply be that it's a tit for tat, because Modi did not go to the Belt and Road Summit that Xi held, so maybe he's angry about that.
But India has never been part of the BRI. India's always opposed the BRI, and China has been a very active participant in the G20 before this.
Yeah, no, so clearly it's a deliberate snub. The question is whether the snub is just a tit for tat and that he wants to make a limited point about the BRI, or whether there's a bigger sense that he wants to snub India, or that he's uncomfortable with the G20. I suspect that it's a bit of both of the latter, that clearly Indian-Chinese tensions have been high ever since the incidents on the Himalayas, the killing on both sides. They are still capable of meeting in contexts such as the BRICS, but it's not an easy relationship. Maybe Xi doesn't feel comfortable being, India's guest in Delhi, or maybe he doesn't want to engage with the Americans at this particular point, because the last time that Biden spoke to Xi one-on-one was in the Bali G20 meeting. The Americans have been saying for a while that they want to get back to Bali. There's been a lot of troubles in the US-Chinese relationship, the balloon incident, cancelled meetings, etc., etc. So the Chinese may feel that this is a big prize, or a big moment anyway, when Xi and Biden re-engage, and they're not ready for it yet. So, but for whatever reason, it's very, very pointed that he's not coming. And I think it does make a point about, I was looking at the interview that you did with the Prime Minister Modi, where he talked about, the hope that the G20 could become the voice of the global South. But it does raise the question of, is there a coherent global South? If China and India are really loggerheads or not able to coordinate a position, then is there a global South really to represent in this context?
Martin Wolf, so much is being said about the state of the Chinese economy. Now you've got two dynamics playing out. You've got companies like Country Garden, going bust, and you've also got, at the same time, Huawei coming up with a 5G phone, which when broken down seems to have highly sophisticated semiconductor chips inside it. What's your reading as a whole of the Chinese economy, given that a lot of the economic data now seems to have gone dark?
I think this is, to me, the most interesting economic question in the world right now. And I noticed that there's lots of Western commentary that is very gleeful and confident that this is now the end of the Chinese growth story. My honest view is, at the moment, I haven't made up my mind. And I think that is the right position to take. Let me just set out the arguments. There's a perfectly straightforward short-term argument, which is that which has two elements to it: that the COVID policy and what went with the COVID policy had much bigger effects on Chinese confidence of both consumers and of business, and has affected, therefore, demand and supply very significantly, and is leading to much greater short-term weakness than expected. And the second is that we've got to the end of what was an extraordinary, and it was widely accepted, unsustainable property bubble. I've written lots and lots about this. And while it's not going to lead to the sort of financial crisis, or it's unlikely to lead to the sort of financial crisis that we saw in the West in 2008-9, it's going to lead to a slowdown in demand. And the result of this is they've got a real, as it were, recession. But that doesn't mean necessarily that the long-term structural growth of China has unambiguously decelerated across the board. It means that they have a structural problem, which is to deal with the overhang of bad debt and the decline in the boom in the property sector, and they have the problem of what the COVID policy has done to confidence. That seems to me reasonably reasonably clear. What is open to question, and this would involve a lot of discussion, is whether the entire long-run underlying growth dynamic of China is over. And I believe that provided they take the right decisions, it's probably premature to think that China's growth at a faster rate than the West, let's say 4 or 5 against 2 or so, that is over. I'm not yet confident that we can state that Chinese rapid growth and catch-up is now over.
Part of the reason China grew the way that it did over the past few decades is because it emerged as a manufacturing hub for the rest of the world. We're already seeing the US Commerce Secretary Gina Raimondo, when she was in Beijing, say China is becoming increasingly uninvestable for international firms, and because of ad hoc economic decision making, companies are finding it very unpredictable to work in China. Could that then suggest, possibly, Martin Wolf, that the best days for the Chinese economy in terms of growth are now behind it?
Well, in some sense, the answer to that has to be yes. China grew at about 10% a year. For an economy of that size, that's simply unbelievable. There was never the slightest chance it could sustain that growth for the next 20 or 30 years. The question is it over the next 20 years going to be 5%, 4 or 5%, or is it going to be 1 or 2, or is it going to actually shrink? And that was what I was talking about. But there's no doubt there are massive headwinds to China. First of all, it's already relatively much richer than it was. The world economy is much less accommodating than it was. It's not going to get the inflow of technology that it was going to have. Its demography is deteriorating. Investment opportunities are clearly diminishing. All that's obvious. Nonetheless, its productivity overall is about a third of US levels. It has huge technological strength of its own, not across the board, but there's no doubt its relative technological position is completely different from it was 30 or 40 years ago. And it seems to me impossible to state that they can't manage 4 or 5% growth in a country where the savings rate is 40% plus, where they have a vast number of very talented and high qualified people, unbelievable quantities of engineers and so forth, and lots of advanced technology. So I think it's going to fall somewhere between the 2-3% the West, I think, hopes for, and the 5%, which seems to me perfectly feasible. But the old days of Chinese growth are, of course, completely irrecoverable. That could never have been sustained on that scale for very much longer.
Gideon Rachman, in the interview that we did with Prime Minister Modi. He speaks of how he hopes the G20 in India will emerge as the catalyst of a new world order. We saw Borge Brande, who you know well, the president of the World Economic Forum at the India at 100 summit, tell us in an interaction that he sees in the next 10 years India becoming a $10 trillion economy and the global order being shaped by what he termed the G3, the United States, China and India. Is that an optimism you share, or do you think it will be too premature to talk about the emergence of a G3?
To me, I think that is premature. I mean, it depends what you mean by the world order being shaped. I mean, there's one thing which is economic weight, but there's also strategic weight, military power, and then there's the having the structures with which to express power. And certainly India's, developing, it's the economy everybody's excited about. It's a huge country. One can see the potential there. But in terms of military power, the US is unrivaled, both in terms of its global reach and its alliance system, which really China has nothing comparable to it. But China has poured money into its military. By some measures, it has the largest navy in the world, and it's going through a very rapid nuclear arms build-up and so on. So I think that it's a military player or a potential military player in a way that India isn't and perhaps doesn't want to be. In a way, hats off to the India if they don't have massive military ambitions. But I do think that hard power aspect is significant to being a shaper of the global order. You need both. I mean, Russia. Its economy was never large enough to support its superpower ambitions, and we discover actually its military wasn't as good as they claimed. But China and the US are the two countries I think that have both the military wherewithal and the economic size. And also, I'm interested that Borge Brande should say that, because he does rather forget Europe, which is growing slowly, but by some measures the EU single market, certainly the EU single market plus the UK, is a larger market than any other in the world, and remains has plenty of technologically advanced companies, etc. Plus, if you agglomerate European military power, it's also not insignificant. So I think that the Europeans, who incidentally also have 2 of the 5 seats, or 3 of the 5 seats, if you count the Russians as Europeans, on the UN Security Council for historic reasons, also shouldn't be counted out of the picture.
Yeah, and that's also where the WEF is based. So yes, it is interesting that sitting in Switzerland, he's saying this, but he also said this at the India at 100 summit. Martin, so much is being spoken of in India about India potentially becoming the 3rd largest economy in the world by 2027. Now, whether it's 2027 or 28 or maybe 2030, that is still contested. But the idea that India will be the 3rd largest economy in the world seems in some senses inevitable. Now, the question is, and I'm interested in your perspective on this, is it a matter of just arithmetic inevitability as the Indian opposition claims, or do you think it also has to do at this moment from a global outlook to do with the kind of political stability that exists in India, current policies, which the government claims is what has propelled India from number 10 years ago to being the 3rd largest economy in a few years from now?
So fascinating. First of all, I would just repeat what Gideon said. I consider Europe to be an integrated economy, and it is and will remain bigger than India. But if we consider countries formally defined, that is a perfectly plausible ambition. My expectation is that India's economy should be able to grow in real terms at about 6% a year or so over the next several years. And that ought to be the fastest growth of any really large economy. And it will therefore continue a relative rise. If you're asking, is this due to the present government or further back, I consider the turning point for the Indian economy to be the early 90s, and the trend has continued since then, and the growth has been slower since the financial crisis than before it, and that's been true over both administrations. So I think it's a quality of India itself. And finally, of course, I would stress that in achieving economically, of course, India has a very large number of challenges. Its industrial sector remains relatively weak. Its export sector has never rivaled what the Chinese have achieved. Unemployment is a very, very big problem in India. But yes, I think it's perfectly plausible that India will continue to rise and become, if we ignore Europe, the third most important economy in the world. But it will, and Gideon is clearly right, under almost any assumptions, remain far, far behind China and the US for at least the next 20 years and probably beyond that.
Gideon Rachman, one of the things that's been stressed during India's G20 presidency is the Prime Minister's attempt to make India the voice of the global South. Now, China has, over the past few decades, tried to build inroads with countries in Africa, South America and elsewhere to make itself the natural leader of the global South. India is trying to give the African Union a permanent position in the G20, and that's pitched as one of the big ideas of the Indian presidency. Do you see this idea of India trying to be the voice of the global South leading to a contestation with China, which sees itself as the natural leader of the global South?
Yeah, I think there is an implicit contest going on there. I mean, I think the way that India's played it is very interesting because it's trying to have a foot both in the Western world camp and in the sort of global South camp, including organizations that are arguably increasingly dominated by China. So that, the BRICS summit, you would know better than me what India's attitude to the expansion of it was, but I think that it was certainly something pushed very, very hard by China, which I think now sees the BRICS as a potential alternative to the G7. And I think, incidentally, since we're talking about the G20, one thing to note is that after the big first leaders summit of the G20, a lot of people said the G7 would disappear, that it was no longer relevant. And I think even in the West people felt that. But now I would say the US is putting considerable more energy into the G7 than to the G20 because it's strategically and politically a more coherent group. It's basically the Western world, and they are more likely to come up with real policies than the G20 is. I think for India, this idea of, for the moment, trying to keep a foot in both camps makes sense. Go to the BRICS, go to the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, but also accept the invitations to the G7 summits, be a member of the Quad, because we don't know how these strategic rivalries are going to play out. And indeed, although what India's continuing relationship with Russia has clearly antagonized the West, the oil sales and so on, I think to some extent people in the West accept parts of the Indian argument that it's to everybody's benefit if there is a large country like India that kind of has relations with everybody. But I do wonder, in this period of rising tensions between the US and China, the Ukraine war, and now this kind of big question mark we've been asking about, well, what is Xi Jinping up to, both in his attitude to India as expressed through the G20, how long this straddle by India is going to be sustainable. At a certain point, is it going to be a situation where they are going to have to make some choices that so far they've really avoided?
Martin Wolf, even America is trying to ensure that the economic relationship with China doesn't degenerate to a point of no return. They're trying to keep the economic conversation going while accepting the element of competition and even a certain amount of adversity. Do you see India being able to continue to be a part of the Quad, be an invitee to the G7, and yet be a part of the SCO and BRICS? Or do you think at some point in time this trapeze will need to end and India would need to pick a side?
Well, I think I'd rather follow Gideon's view. India is, I think, quite cleverly trying to be a member of almost everything. And that is, I think, a position that it's probably it is more capable of being in that position than any other significant country. And good luck to it, as it were. The question, of course, is whether that's sustainable and whether it's effective. I'd like to stress the latter point. I'll come to both. On the sustainability, it's sustainable so long as the rivalries between dominant powers which are shaping the transformation of current global politics and economics remain manageable and containable. In other words, so long as you don't have to choose which side to belong to. And that's where we are now, and I very much hope we will remain there, that it doesn't get to that point. And in that situation, India can, of course, try to be part of everything. Then you get to the question of effectiveness. You talk particularly about the leadership of the Global South, which brings me back very much to my childhood days and youthful days when there was the Global Non-Aligned Movement and India was a leader of the Global Non-Aligned Movement. And the question really is there geopolitically such a thing as the Global South? I don't like the phrase anyway, but I'll leave that aside. I just don't think geopolitically there is. The Global South contains the vast majority of human beings, and they have vastly divergent interests, positions, economic, geopolitical. And the one thing they do share is they want more from the global north. And in that sense, India can try to lead that group to some extent. But basically, the global south is not, and Gideon suggested that, a coherent grouping. And the very fact that China and India are both vying to be leaders of it sort of suggests that fact. So I would say that India should do the best it can with this position, exploit every opportunity it can, but it's probably not going to be a completely effective geopolitical strategy, and I'm reasonably certain that the Modi government understands that.
Gideon, what's your sense of how the Russia-Ukraine war shapes up from here? In the past few days, Ukraine's been claiming some successes in its counter-offensive. We've seen some drone attacks in Russia as well. There's been a change in the defense ministry. From where things are, where do you see this war go?
Well, I think the first thing to say is that, this war, like all wars, is very unpredictable, and there have been several things that weren't anticipated. The complete failure initially of Russia's assault on Kiev, then things like the fall of Kharkiv. And now I think that the Ukrainians, up until now, have certainly done slightly worse than the West had hoped in this counteroffensive. But, this was the most trailed counteroffensive that I can ever remember. It was for months that they were saying they were going to attack as they built up their forces. And that, unfortunately, gave the Russians the chance to build these formidable minefields, which are taking many lives as we speak. It does sound like the Ukrainians have made a small breakthrough, but the conventional wisdom, I think, is that unless there's another surprise, then that's not going to turn into a sort of sudden Russian collapse, which allows the Ukrainians to get to the Sea of Azov, which is their goal, very quickly. So I think people are now looking ahead to another year of fighting, and the question is, which side has the greater endurance? I mean, I think my concern is that Russians have greater resources in terms of manpower, the state of their economy. It's not great, but unlike the Ukrainians, they're not completely reliant on budgetary support from outside. And of course, the Ukrainians have this question mark over what happens in the American election. Is there this sort of sword of Damocles of the Donald Trump victory that might lead to a cutoff in Western aid? But it's not all negative. I mean, the West has been slow actually in making its mind up about giving Ukraine things. So they're still getting stuff that's been promised. The advanced fighter planes are not yet deployed, and they will be in the next fighting season, and that could make a real difference. I think that we'll probably get to a position where Ukraine will have more artillery shells and so on, and they are determined to keep fighting as far as one can tell. So I'm afraid it looks like another year of bloodshed ahead.
Martin, the Russian economy so far has held together better than most analysts expected when the sanctions were imposed. Is that the way you think it will stay, that they've been able to find ways around the sanctions and keep the economy going, even if it's not firing on all cylinders, but it's not coming apart in the way one may have imagined?
Well, actually, I'm not surprised by this. I wrote a column rather soon after the war fought in which I discussed the history of sanctions. And I pointed out that in general, the history of sanctions is a history of disappointment. It's very, very difficult to break an economy by sanctions, and that's true of much weaker ones. Iraq is, under Saddam, is one of many, many examples. Since Russia has huge natural resources which it can continue to sell, it can earn money, either through bilateral payment systems or even in hard currency, and it can buy stuff. The people who believe the sanctions are working argue, and I can't comment on this, I just don't have the expertise Gideon may, that they are preventing them from getting high quality materials needed for munitions, the sort of technology that they need to import in order to sustain a high quality armed forces are very significantly constrained. But the fact that the Russian economy can continue to produce stuff, that it can continue to sell stuff abroad, for instance, to India, for example, and as a result can continue to import the stuff it needs to survive, along with the fact that obviously it's a huge economy with huge resources, therefore that it can survive sanctions seems to me completely unsurprising. It's one of the non-surprises, and this war will not be settled by the direct effect on the economy of the sanctions, though it might be affected by its impact on the quality of the Russian armed forces. My own worry throughout has been this would end as a very prolonged stalemate, and at the moment, at least to me, that looks like what's happening.
Last question, Gideon Rahman, about the US elections and what do you actually see happen? No one knows for sure, but given everything that you're seeing, reading, the dots that you're joining, where do you think we may end up?
Look, I mean, every American election seems extraordinary, but this one is more extraordinary than any I can remember. I mean, not least because of the strong possibility that Trump will be convicted of some of the charges facing him, particularly the federal charges relating to January the 6th, during the course of the campaign. So you have the possibility that one of the candidates will win the Republican nomination and then be sent to prison and be campaigning from prison. I mean, it sounds like a sort of a mini-series that would be rejected for improbability, but that is actually possible. But I mean, I think that the thing that would concern, certainly me and the Biden White House is that despite all of this, not only has Trump got pretty much a lock on the Republican nomination, but he's neck and neck with Biden. And given the American Electoral College system and its inbuilt bias towards the Republicans, I think it's entirely conceivable that Donald Trump will win the presidency, this time next year.
And Martin Wolf, if that were to happen, if you were looking into your economic crystal ball, what do you think that means for the global economy? Trump is president again.
Well, I'll just make two comments. First, three. I agree with Gideon. I think this reflects, in my view, a very profound breakdown of the US constitutional and political order, which is, to my mind, quite simply the most important thing happening in the world right now by several orders of magnitude. And third, if it happens, we're living in a different world. We're living in a different world in America. It won't be like the first Trump administration. It'll be very, very different. And I think it will reshape the global political and the economic order in entirely unpredictable ways. We could have a long discussion of what some of those will be, but to me, this is now emerging as one of the great historical moments.
Okay, so we'll just have another conversation. We'll set that up closer to the US elections as this campaign shapes up and we have a clearer sense of who will be on the Republican ticket, whether that guy will be in jail or fighting from the streets, and that will indeed be a fascinating conversation. But for the time being, Martin Wolf from London, Gideon Rahman from Hong Kong for joining us on this roundtable. Thank you so much. Really appreciate your time. Thank you.
Great pleasure.
Thank you.
new world order starts here, and Rising India is leading the way. A new template for a changing world. India in the front seat for global peace and prosperity. As world leaders line up for the big event, India Today gives you the only ringside view. The faces, the voices, the big news breaks. Unrivaled build-up to the G20 summit. Namaste G20. Continuing coverage only on India Today TV.
Air quality today. In Delhi, 68. In Mumbai, 85. In Kolkata, 29. In Bangalore, 29. In Chennai, 53. In Hyderabad, 54.
You're on board the news track. The Prime Minister has now stepped into the Sanatan row. Days after Udayanidhi Stalin compared Sanatan Dharma to dengue and malaria, the Prime Minister has told his Council of Ministers to counter Stalin Jr. Sources have told India Today that the Prime Minister said there is a need to respond to the Sanatan debate, but with hard facts.
சிலவற்றை நாம் ஒழிக்கத்தான் வேண்டும், எதிர்க்க முடியாது. கொசு, டெங்கு காய்ச்சல், மலேரியா, கொரோனா இதையெல்லாம் நம்ம எதிர்க்க கூடாது, ஒழித்து கட்ட வேண்டும்.
Days after Tamil Nadu Minister Udayanidhi Stalin compared Sanatana Dharma to dengue and malaria and called for its eradication, Prime Minister Narendra Modi has stepped into the controversy. The Prime Minister raised the subject in a meeting with union ministers at the cabinet on Wednesday. Top sources tell India Today the Prime Minister highlighted the need to respond effectively to the debate on Sanatana Dharma sparked by Udayanidhi's comments. Sources say the Prime Minister advised his colleagues not to go into history but stick to the facts as per the Constitution. The ministers were advised to speak on the current situation. Meanwhile, an FIR has been registered in Rampur, Uttar Pradesh against Udayanidhi Stalin over his remark on Sanatana Dharma. Karnataka Minister Priyank Kharge has also been booked over his comments that allegedly backed Udayanidhi Stalin.
They don't care, they can do what they want. My statement is very, very clear. It's not against any particular religion. I have very clearly stated that any religion that does not preach equality, that does not ensure the dignity of a human being is embedded in that philosophy, it is not a religion according to me.
The Tamil Nadu Chief Minister's son is holding his ground and has defiantly refused to apologize or clarify. The DMK leader also targeted the Narendra Modi government over the omission of President Draupadi Murmu from the inauguration ceremony of the new parliament building.
The Honorable President Draupadi Murmu, madam, she was not invited for the opening of the parliament. Right. That is the best current example. Thank you. No question of apology. Somebody's apologized to me? They demanded your apology. No, sorry.
Stalin Jr.'s comments have sparked a backlash from the BJP.
You are lucky, Udayanidhi Stalin. ನೀನು ಸನಾತನ ಧರ್ಮೀಯರು ಬಹುಸಂಖ್ಯಾತರು ಇರುವ ದೇಶದಲ್ಲಿ ಹುಟ್ಟಿದೀಯ. ನೀ ಏನಾದ್ರೂ ಅರಬ್ನಲ್ಲೋ ಇರಾನ್ನಲ್ಲೋ ಇರಾಕ್ನಲ್ಲೋ ಹುಟ್ಟಿದ್ರೆ ನಿನ್ನ ಪರಿಸ್ಥಿತಿ ಏನಾಗ್ತಿತ್ತು? ಯು ಆರ್ ಲಕ್ಕಿ, ಯು ಆರ್ ಸೇಫ್. ನಮ್ಮ ದೇಶದಲ್ಲಿ ಅಷ್ಟು ಸುಲಭವಾಗಿ ಯಾರನ್ನು ಕೊಲ್ಲೋದಕ್ಕೆ ಮನಸ್ಸು ಮಾಡೋದಿಲ್ಲ.
काल इतना हिंदू के लिए इतना खतरनाक चीज बताया. If somebody would have said against Muslim and Christian, what would have been you reacted? Why? He is non-secular, he is communal, he is speaking against Islam. Now, why you are speaking against Hindu?
The row over Sanatan Dharma shows no sign of ending. Now a video of Udayanidhi's grandfather and DMK patriarch M. Karunanidhi criticizing Sanatana Dharma has gone viral.
இன்றைக்கு கூட நீங்கள் மனுதர்ம சாஸ்திரத்தை எடுத்து பிரித்து படித்து பார்த்தால் அதில் என்ன எழுதியிருக்கிறது என்றால் சூத்திரன் ஒருவன் படித்தால் அவன்